when Matt brought up the like thank you for smoking and that maybe we should do a comedy and maybe we will do one in the future, especially a comedy. I'm sure we will, but thank you for smoking specifically. It's it always brings up that old tired cliche that that's not a cliche, but it's true that like comedies have a bad rep, like in at least in Hollywood, maybe not in the arts generally, because comedies did have a more special place. I feel like in like Greek theater and like the
Yeah.
more the origins of it. Um, but nowadays, yes, there's this whole thing that it's not nominated for Oscar very often, and
Well,
the
just the
gold.
sheer fact that the Golden Globes have a separate category, right? I mean, that says enough right there.
Yeah.
There's exactly, and even then, it shares it with musicals, which is funny because there's not a lot of musicals nowadays, but I guess they always squeeze one or two movies in there that are musicals. Yes, exactly. Can you think of any movies in recent memory that were comedies that were nominated for Best Picture?
Oh,
I guess
Uh,
there's
uh,
whatchamacallit, the one with the with the wagon, the Volkswagen, Little Miss Sunshine was
yeah, that
nominated.
was
oh
probably
yeah.
comedy. Of course, that was 11 or years ago or so. No, that was almost 15 years ago.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. That was 15 years ago. Um,
14 or 15.
it came out in 2006,
Wow.
and Paul Dano still looks the same. Uh,
I was working at the movie theater in Calabasas when that movie came out.
uh,
That's when I met Gary Sinise.
oh, cool.
Yeah, so I do wonder. It's a good topic of conversation. We can discuss like some of our favorite comedies, and for me personally, the ones that are my favorites, like my top five almost, like every single one of them is there for a different reason. I don't think there's one reason why a comedy stands out. Um, but I guess as far as the Oscars or critical acclaim, it does seem like there's a tendency to really appreciate more the comedies that have a lot of heart, like Little Miss Sunshine.
Yeah.
Sure.
That. Um, what are some of your like favorite comedies?
I have really random lists of all kinds of different movie crap.
Yeah, but I can tell you mine, and maybe it starts the conversation because
Sure. Yeah.
there's different ones for different reasons, but Team America is definitely one of my favorites,
Oh
and
yeah.
it's a combination of that one's a combination of several things. It's extremely funny. It's hilarious. Like I laugh out
Yeah.
loud most of the time, like most of the movie, especially on the first or second watch.
Mhm.
But it's also a very sophisticated parody, almost like in the Mel
Mhm.
Brooks sort of style of it's parodying action movies, it's parodying
Mhm.
culture, politics, celebrity, and their excursions into politics. Like it goes so much. It's like it's a parody, it's a satire, it's an action movie. It's really so many things, and it's
Yeah.
hilarious. Um, like a good opposite example, in a way, not opposite, but another top five for me probably is Doctor Strangelove. And honestly, I don't think I've ever laughed that much during the movie. I might have chuckled a few times, and maybe I laughed more so when I watched it, say at the New Beverly or one of these theaters where you're with a very good
Mhm.
audience that's really into it. But then those guys like laugh out loud, but when we watch Barry Lyndon, so but but that's for a different reason. Like Doctor Strangelove is not because it's per se super funny. It's because the satire there is so strong. It's because it was such an important topic at the time. It was I guess very similar to The Great Dictator. It was like Chaplin doing a movie about the Holocaust and Hitler while it was still happening. That's what Doctor Strangelove was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a very courageous comedy to make, and maybe Doctor Strangelove just pulls it off a bit better than The Great Dictator, but But yeah, that's so different reasons for different movies. And I have a few other ones, but those are like two big ones that definitely are up there.
Yeah. This is not necessarily to say that these are like on my list or anything, but I just thought I'd mention this because I was, like I said, I was looking to see if I'd written anything down, which I hadn't apparently. But you were asking about comedy films that got some sort of recognition, like in either the Oscars or the Golden Globes or something like that. And I have a list here of some stuff that just this is just stuff that was nominated like for Best Picture. I'm sure there was plenty of other stuff during these years, but you know how like it's almost like you said with when you mentioned Little Bit of Sunshine, it's like it's almost like you rarely see just something that would very easily fall into the category of comedy. It's usually like a comedy drama or something like that. You know, it's like it there's something else about it that yeah, I don't know, whatever. But I mean, I'm looking here like obviously I'm sure La La Land was considered a comedy and or musical in the Golden Globes. That was 2017. I think there's a good chance, even though they're not very normal traditional comedies, I think there's a chance that those films by what's that director's name? He did Vice and the Big Short.
Adam McKay.
McKay, yeah. Both of his movies on some broad spectrum are probably considered comedies for sure. And then the same year as The Big Short, The Martian was nominated. I bet you that's probably considered a comedy by some standards anyway. I mean, I don't think
There's
that
a
it necessarily
controversy there that's
it's
like,
their
why is that a comedy? It's because like Matt Damon is a bit like jokey in that movie. It's like,
well, it's got
yeah.
moments of levity, you know, and like stuff. But yeah, I mean, I would consider those all to be kind of barely comedies myself.
Yeah, I think both of those would be massive stretches, and I would never define those as comedies. But
Yeah, that's like comic relief. It's
yeah,
not really a comedy per se. Yeah.
I don't think that I would toss them into that pile either, but they have comical elements in them for sure. But you know,
Now, do you have any standout like comedies that pop to mind?
I mean, obviously, we started, this. I think we kind of jumped off on this with me recommending Thank You for Smoking. That's always going to be one of my favorite. That's probably always going to be one of my favorite comedies. That's really seriously a comedy. But I was also thinking, A Serious Man. I mean, that I think that is very solidly a comedy, even though it has a nice tragic
even though it's
ending
not all
to
that
it.
funny.
Huh?
Yeah, no, it is pretty funny, but I agree that the Coen brothers, it's sort of like Kubrick. It's
Yeah.
all their movies are funny to some degree. Some are just more funny than others,
Yeah.
because they kind of outline the absurdity of life in different situations. But
I think Burn After Reading is like 5 times funnier than everything in A Serious Man, but that could just be me.
oh no, that's a
My
good point. Yeah,
yeah,
that's a true comedy. Big Lebowski, I would say, is more of
yeah,
a comedy than.
Big Lebowski was going to be my next one, but also, I mean, that's another discussion. Like, what constitutes more of a comedy? Where do you draw the line of saying what is, one of the best comedies ever made?
Well, that's a separate discussion. I was just talking about how funny they are.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
but
But
that's what we mean actually. That this is this discussion because really some movies are comedies that are not super funny, like Strangelove, but there's still an appreciation for the humorous aspect in them. Sort of like a very solid South Park episode that's got some great satire in it, but not as many laughs as maybe some better episodes. But the satire is just strong.
yeah,
Something along, like for example, I mean, one of my favorites growing up was Young Frankenstein and Spaceballs.
Yeah.
mhm,
Spaceballs, I laughed more, but as I got older, I realized that Young Frankenstein is just a genius. Also, Blazing Saddles, like it's just those two movies are on a different level than Spaceballs. Spaceballs is just a barrel of
Yeah.
laughs and a crazy amount of how many jokes you can squeeze into an hour and a half. But Young Frankenstein and Blazing Saddles are sophisticated,
I would argue
parodies.
that I completely agree with what you're saying, but I would kind of word it as like you said, Spaceballs is just like a lot of laughs, really funny parody and stuff like that. Really well made and everything, of course. But I would say that Blazing Saddles is like, even for the time, pretty daring, and like the laughs come at like a sense of like, I can't believe they did that. That's like hilarious. Oh my gosh. And then also just genuinely funny stuff. But then I would say for me, Young Frankenstein is not just like on another level. I think it's like you said, I think I laughed a lot more
Mhm.
when I watched it as I got older. But it's also just like a phenomenal movie. Like just as a movie in itself, I think it's even better than the other two. I probably don't
Yeah,
laugh as much as Blazing Saddles because how can you? But but
in a way, like Mel Brooks movies, the better ones, they kind of showcase what I brought up in the conversation in the beginning, is that they're good comedies for different reasons. Blazing Saddles is for the social commentary and how daring it was. Young Frankenstein is for the essentially a remake aspect to it, or a sequel. It's essentially a sequel to the original Frankenstein, but it's almost like done in the same quality of filmmaking, only it's funny. It's not something that you expect from a spoof, or from a movie that's making fun or light of the original. And then Spaceballs is like a whole other level. Yeah, it's just taking
Mhm.
jokes to the next level as far as quantity. Yeah, so different reasons, like for different movies.
I would say, just to point this out as an interesting fact, kind of exactly what you're saying. A friend of mine, my friend Steven, and I talk about movies a lot, and he always likes to bring up how one of the things that can kind of help a movie transcend from like just being really good to like really great is especially a movie like what we're talking about in this particular circumstance
Mhm.
with Young Frankenstein. You can have a movie that's like a parody of something, or a movie that's like a very specific genre or something like that, and it can do a really good job of being a parody, or it can do a really good job of fitting into that genre and whatever. But when it's a great movie in its own right, then that kind of like takes it to the next level. It's like to say that Young Frankenstein is a as you said, it's a sequel technically, but it's also a parody, and a and it's not just a sequel to Frankenstein, like following the events of. It's also a Frankenstein movie. Like it's a telling of that
Yeah.
same story. Because the plot is similar, and even though they're saying that it's the son, and they're saying that this all happened after, it's still a movie. It's basically Mel Brooks doing Frankenstein, and in itself, it's like one of the greatest Frankenstein movies ever made.
Yeah, it's a sincere movie. Exactly. Like it's just really sincere. Like it's really taking seriously the filmmaking, but just has that element of jokiness, basically.
Yeah,
But as far as the tone, the music, everything is really, yeah, it's really spot on.
like it's a
It's
it's a Frankenstein movie almost first, and then it's also a parody, and it's also every other thing we just talked about. It's like it covers all those bases initially, which
I
is
guess
awesome.
a similar example, like a more modern example, would be Tropic Thunder.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh
That
exactly.
yeah.
was a comedy that was shot almost as well as some of the best war movies. At
Yeah,
least, like,
it's a
Yeah.
great action movie, and it's a comment on the hilariousness of action movies, and the nature of the industry,
Yeah.
all that shit.
yeah,
And they got John Toll to actually do the cinematography on it. So that I mean, and I actually think that's something that is worth bringing up in a lot of these great comedies is that they treat certain things really seriously. Just to it's not like a bunch of people on set just kind of. I mean, there are a lot of comedies that people seem to like that, especially nowadays with digital, where they just roll the camera and people just ad lib and they cut it together later. But I think the really good comedies are usually the ones that take certain aspects really seriously and make it a good movie. And it's what's happening in front of the camera that's actually kind of humorous and off the wall. And I mean, everybody's taking it seriously. It's not like all the actors are like winking at you. Yeah, they actually really you buy them as real people, and the crew is actually handling it like a real production. And
Yeah,
I
and there's also
yeah,
there's also like the good example, like Team America was Bill Pope was the cinematographer, which is
yeah,
like he's like a big actor. He did The Matrix, right? Like
correct.
it
Yes.
was like you remember I heard a story, like he told a story on a podcast that he got a call from them and it's like, really, the South Park guys want to talk to me? And he was like, yeah, I make action movies. And then they talked to him like, no, this is perfect. This is exactly what we want. We want to make an action movie just with puppets, like with
Yeah,
like they really needed that to bring that cinematic element to it and someone that's going to
Definitely.
ground it in reality. Yeah, and they achieved it. So yes, and that's a good point about comedies that do it well. Is it's cinema, it's movies. If you're gonna make a funny story within this medium, you should use the tools of the medium. There's no point if you're just gonna have talking heads and laughs, but you don't utilize the visuals. It's not that I dislike all the movies that go that route, comedy wise, but I just think that the ones I like best are the ones that utilize the entire capacity of the medium.
yeah. Like Edgar Wright movies. I mean, not only being brilliantly shot, but also like brilliantly edited and visual comedy, punchy. Everything's designed down to a T, and you're not relying on just stumbling on something. Everything is planned. Everything is. I mean, the camera and the editing are part of the wit.
Yep.
And that's what makes him so good. At least part of what makes him so good. But yeah. So like Scott Pilgrim versus the World, I just saw a screening of that a couple months ago, which
Nice.
was delightful. Unfortunately, I was alone in the theater, and it kind of loses some of its
Oh, I bet.
energy. I mean, I'm still alone in the theater, laughing at a lot of moments, but it is one of those things where comedies, they're best shared. That's a perfect example of a comedy that is definitely a comedy and off the wall and weird, but also bold. It's shot as well as any action movie or drama out there. It's edited better than most movies out there. The sound design is amazing. The performances, even by Brie Larson, are great. So, yeah, I mean, it's and the funny thing is, the first time that I saw it, I just kind of thought it was a little bit too loud for me, and then I saw it a few more
What?
times, and it's yeah, I have a weird thing about a lot of loud noises, but 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 no,
I'll just leave
it,
that alone.
yeah, eventually it sunk into me, and that's become easily one of my favorite comedies. And Michael Cera just really kind of perfectly cast. I mean, I can't imagine. Seriously, who else plays Scott Pilgrim? I mean,
I didn't read the source material, but I mean, yeah, I thought he was great.
yeah,
So I guess we touched on like she said thank you for smoking. One thing I was gonna say about Jason Reitman, I feel like he's like the Shyamalan of comedies.
What?
Like he had like an explosive start to his career. Like Thank You for Smoking,
Juno.
Juno. Up in the Air, and then all of a sudden like Young Adult, Labor Day, Tully, and now I guess he's doing there's Men, Women, and Children. Yeah.
I didn't
Um,
see Labor Day.
yeah, The Front Runner was another like I think forgettable political movie he made that was like not really a comedy, I think. It was
Yeah.
a movie. And so I just feel like he burned a bit too hot early on and he was on a
Yeah.
roll and it was just very tough to sustain that. And I think that's why he kind of started producing a lot of things. You take the pressure off of himself and then maybe come back and do things. And now he's doing, he's doing the Ghostbusters movie, which is sort of like more an homage to his dad than anything else. But it's not.
Yeah.
I like the guy. I think he's extremely talented, and there's a very good reason why he was so successful. But it's you kind of feel bad for like it's just tough. Making a good movie is not easy. So
Yeah.
when you do it several times in a row, it's kudos. Yeah.
I
And
retract my my reaction to what you said because after you said that, I just realized that I felt so strongly about that because I think the only movies of his I've seen were those first three and Young Adult, which I obviously thought wasn't as good as those first three, but I still thought was a pretty good movie in certain ways. I never saw any of the three that came after that. So I've somehow insulated myself from seeing his, unintentionally from seeing his less than stellar movies.
yeah, it is true that he has kind of fallen off. Yeah, there's no getting around that. I've heard good things about the new Ghostbusters, so
We'll see.
maybe he'll bounce back. But there is an interesting thing about when you think about Juno too,
Oh
which
yeah, Juno I think was nominated for a script, right? Or one script.
I think Diablo Cody won for that, didn't she?
I believe so.
Well, I know
Juno
that
got it says
one Oscar. Yeah,
I know Ebert gave
yeah,
it good
yeah,
reviews.
Diablo Cody won screenplay for Juno, and I mean, I guess that's kind of an interesting thing with comedy, just as a genre. I mean, because I think that Juno qualifies as a comedy.
Absolutely.
You still cry at the end. I mean, like it's still a rough movie. By the time you get to the end of it, but it's still it's still clearly a comedy. And I mean, honestly, if we're going to accept comedies that kind of eventually rip your heart out at the end, I mean, my favorite of all time is still going to be Annie Hall.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's a good example that the Woody Allen comedies, especially the better ones, are did get some love from the Academy and stuff like Manhattan.
Oh, Annie Hall beat Star Wars
For
for
Best
Best
Picture.
Picture.
Yeah, but I mean,
Yeah.
Star
But who's
Wars
to
is kind
say
of
that
like
it should have?
yeah. But yeah, no, it's I'm trying to think of any other ones like
Any other comedies, period?
oh maybe because I'm trying to think back then like 70s and stuff comedies. I think there was some like maybe not the Mel Brooks type, but the more dramedies that might have gotten more attention or um,
Yeah.
yeah, Harold and Maude I think is considered
Yeah,
like very famous classic comedy.
definitely.
Um, and I think Al Hashby is it? Um,
Yeah.
there was the one with the Peter Sellers. Oh, Being There, sorry.
Yeah, being there.
Being There. Being There. Yeah, Al. Is it Hal Ashby? Yeah, I was right. Yeah, so there's some of those classic ones that definitely got some attention, like those comedies, but they're more muted for sure. Um,
Yeah.
kind of like and maybe that's just a factor. I do wonder sometimes if that's a factor of just time goes by. Like that's why Doctor Strangelove maybe it wasn't a laugh out loud comedy for me. Oh yeah, he did Harold and Maude too. Oh no, actually he just yeah he did, yeah, Hal Ashby.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and there is I was gonna mention Blake Edwards too that did the Pink Panther movies, which I've seen none of them. But I didn't
Well, you
realize
should
this. Like,
watch them. They're pretty good.
yeah, no, I'm sure. And when I was younger, there was a movie I was obsessed with. We had like on VHS. I watched it so many times, and and then I realized later on, as I got older, that it was Blake Edwards, because then I knew who he was, and that goes into like another genre of comedies is the great epic comedies, the 3 hour ones. This one was
Yeah, we watched all those together.
well, there's the wide world thing, like that one,
Yeah.
right? But this
Yeah.
one is the Great Race. I don't know if
Yeah,
I've ever showed this to you guys. Did I?
you did. We did. We did a
Yeah.
double feature, not on the same day,
Oh,
obviously,
on the
because that
same
would be
night. Yeah.
absurd. But
That'd be long.
first we watched the what was it called? The Great Race.
The Great Race. Yeah.
Yeah, that you showed us that one, and then I showed you guys. It's a mad world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a good
Yes.
little weekend.
Yeah. No, it's those movies are definitely rare, but yeah, but like those two movies like where they're kind of like kaleidoscope of characters and like
Yeah,
they're it's almost like they're essentially the Lawrence of Arabia of comedies in a way.
yeah,
Uh,
that's a
but
good way of putting it.
Yeah, exactly. And I love The Great Race. Like I was obsessed with it. It was such a long movie, and it's like Jack Lemmon is and Peter Falk are like amazing in it. Yeah, it's got so much in it. It's such a cartoonish movie, but like in the best possible sort of way.
Jack
Uh,
Lemmon kind of makes it.
yeah, Jack
Yeah.
Lemmon definitely makes it, and but Peter Falk, I mean,
Yeah,
both of them basically make it. But and then Tony Curtis, yeah, Tony Curtis and Natalie Wood are kind of like the straight characters
yeah.
to that crazy duo on the other end. But yeah, no, it's that's definitely a standout. And then in a more modern sense, to me, I feel like of the Jim Carrey comedies, obviously you have to mention like Dumb and Dumber, which is just funny that I was like his second movie. Like to come out with like Ace Ventura and then Dumb and Dumber. I feel like as far as
I
comedy,
think all three, Ace Ventura, Dumb and Dumber, and The Mask, are all like outstanding.
well, The Mask was funny, but it wasn't Ace Ventura Dumb and Dumber funny. It was a bit more heavy on the effects and the spectacle than the actual jokes.
Mhm.
But but yeah, it was him at his height. So everything he did on screen was funny. It's just that I felt like Ace Ventura
I
and
definitely think that those are the number one and number two. Dumb and Dumber being one, Ace Ventura being two, and The Mask being three when it comes to his stuff.
yeah, and maybe that's a good like as The Mask. Who directed The Mask?
I don't
Uh,
know.
it's Chuck Russell. And if we haven't heard of him, then probably there's a reason. Because that I was gonna say, like, because if I'm not mistaken, I mean, obviously, Dumb and Dumber was the Farrelly brothers,
Yeah.
and and then Ace Ventura was Tom Shadyac, right?
I'm not sure.
Because yeah, Tom Shadyac, yeah, because those are like standout comedy directors. So it kind of goes to show that there is such a thing as like a really good comedy director. They do influence somewhat the pacing, the performance, the way they group the way they cast the movie together.
Absolutely. I mean, look
Yeah,
at how much better we talked about a bunch of times. How much better the like you mentioned Inherent Vice all those times and how like it just feels like he's trying to make Coen Brothers comedy with that movie, but just kind of falls short. I mean, there's definitely something to be said for the director.
yes, no, and we said like Coen Brothers movies, it's they do use some of the same people, but every movie
Mhm.
is like a very different cast, like the ensemble, but it's always the Coens, like it's their words and it's their world, and it's the same humor. So there's definitely something there to be said for directors, making a comedy stand out. We talked about Adam McKay, like even as
Judd
early
Apatow.
Judd Apatow is like a very big one for sure. But yeah, John Apatow, I was always a bit on the fence about his comedies because they weren't as cinematic. That was basically the sitcom version of film comedies. in a way I felt. But still, you know,
Which is weird because Judd Apatow is one of the few comedy directors who's still shooting on film.
that's to make them still look like movies. Very easy. No, but I mean, I definitely appreciate what he did. He did have like a little renaissance because in the absence of like as Jim Carrey got old and everything, they essentially ushered like the next.
Yeah, it went from like the Farrelly Brothers to like Apatow as like the big things to look for in comedy.
Yeah, and now it kind of opened the door since like Bridesmaids and like these like girls movies to like the girl humor and stuff, and so it's opened up, and I think that's on the heels of like Apatow. So there's definitely a lot to appreciate there as far as the progression of comedy. I did realize in recent years that I really do not watch that many like film comedies. It's I don't know how you guys like fare there, but I just for some reason, maybe because I'm busy and I just don't have time to watch that many movies, I just don't really make it a point to watch many comedies in recent years.
Matt, do you watch all that many comedies?
No, I don't. And I believe it or not, I've thought about this. Um,
Yeah, so that's what I'm asking. Like,
Of
I'm
course, I
wondering if there's
believe
some
it.
sort of drought or something, or it's just that we're like at a phase in our lives where we just don't watch that many comedies.
no, I mean, I don't recall a time in my life when I've watched comedies in cinema on a regular basis. I mean, maybe when I was like 6 or 7, and I'm still going to like Disney movies or something. But
He said with disdain.
yeah, still on the boycott. But I mean, I think that what it is what I generally find funny is topical humor, and topical humor lends itself to television. You can kind of it even though like a Simpsons episode takes a long time to produce, the process of making a Simpsons episode is shorter than making a 90-minute movie. And so it's one of those things where most most comedies in cinema form that I see being advertised and that I've seen in theaters are kind of as dumbed down broad comedy as you can possibly get. That's why you get franchises like Scary Movie, where, the first one was pretty funny. The second one was, I think I chuckled, and then I saw a screening of like Scary Movie 4, like an advanced screening, and I was actually in the focus group and literally just said, "This is everything that's wrong with cinema." I mean, I didn't even crack a smile. I was just kind of disgusted throughout the entire movie. Oh, you made the millionth Shaq can't make a free throw joke. Good for you. Uh, you know, I mean, and also like, you get the romantic comedies. I know that it's not politically correct to say chick flick anymore, but chick flicks like.
Since when?
It's not politically correct to even say that to use the word woman anymore. But, I mean,
Yeah, I said girl comedies. I'm sure I'm gonna get a lot of crap for that because
yeah,
they're called women,
yeah.
not girls.
But
You
I
guys
mean,
think anyone's ever going to listen to this?
Exactly. That is very precious to think that anybody would ever listen.
yeah, right. But yeah, like the movie Hitch, where like yeah, okay, there were a few cute moments because it's Will Smith, and Will Smith is a cute, fun human being and just generally likable. But it has to end with of course, it has to end with the two, with the couple getting married at the end, and the female half of the relationship is just a horrible human being. uh, and I mean, it just feels like it's not thought through. So I just think that comedy is dealt with better in television form, in short form, usually. Movie form comedy needs to have a broader more sweeping, and I would actually say kind of more timeless satirical take on something in order for me to appreciate it. I mean, I appreciate Juno because teenage pregnancy is probably always going to be a thing. I appreciate Annie Hall because romantic relationships are always going to be a thing. Still everybody's going to get the joke about Annie sitting with Alvy on the plane and saying, I'm not sure if this relationship is working. What do you think? And Alvy just saying, well, a relationship is like a shark. It has to be forever moving forward, otherwise it dies. I think what we have on our hands here is a dead shark. That's always going to be kind of funny. And obviously it's funnier coming out of Woody Allen's mouth than out of
I don't know. Yours might be funnier than his.
Again, you don't know who's gonna listen to this. Might be cracking up right now.
Yeah, right. But
I just don't find Woody Allen all that funny in his movies. I find his movies kind of funny. I don't really find him that funny.
I just think, it's like that Simpsons joke from like way back in the 90s when Homer and Marge are throwing a dinner party and they have the Flanders and Dr. Hibbert over and everything, and things kind of get awkward. And Marge just says, "Hey, has anybody seen the new Woody Allen movie?" And then Ned just says, "I like his films except for that nervous fella who's always in them."
That's precisely me. I'm Ned Flanders in that situation.
Yeah. But to wrap up my incredibly long rant, and I apologize for that. Yeah, I think that you really have to knock it out of the park with a really smart comedy in order for me to be intrigued by it. And if you can't do that, I think that cinema is more built for drama, at least in my mind, and television is more built for comedy.
Yeah, I think there might be an analogy there to horror movies in a way. I feel like, but in a different way. Like I feel like to get me interested in a comedy, it needs to be something outside of just being a comedy. Like with the horror movie, it needs to be a director that I would be interested in. It needs to be maybe that the reviews say that it's more suspense than horror, and it's got like a new twist on the concept. So I feel like comedies are the same way, only it's more so the concept, especially if it's a satire. Like a recent one that I watched was like on Netflix. I watched the one about the death of Stalin one.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I watched that one because it was made by the same guy who did this other movie that was also very mockumentary style, kind of. So I wanted to watch it. It wasn't as good as the first movie of his that I watched. Forget what was the first one. But yeah, it was very much sort of. I think he's very inspired by like Doctor Strangelove and stuff, and that's why I gave it a shot. But Steve Buscemi was in it, so that's always good.
Yeah.
But what was the other one? I just want to find the other movie first. But yeah, but I think it's either like the director, the angle of the movie, or of course an actor. If you have a Jim Carrey, I almost feel like in comedy, if you have like a really funny person, especially Adam Sandler and his height and some of these other ones. I guess the more recent one that I never got into was what's his face?
Will Ferrell.
Will Ferrell, yeah. Like he's a big one, but I saw recently actually I saw the Eurovision one that he did.
That was really funny at moments, but it was a pretty bad movie.
It was a pretty bad movie. The music was pretty good actually. That was the kind of funny.
Massive spoiler alert for anyone who actually wants to watch that movie. But the moment that boat blows up, I was laughing hysterically.
Yeah. No, the other movie is In the Loop was the other movie by this director who did the Death of Stalin, and it was like also very mockumentary style thing. James Gandolfini and some others. In any case, yeah. So like people would like either a different angle on comedy, so that's why it's related to horror, or if it's an actor or something that just really I know I'm gonna have a good laugh.
Oh, I mean, by the way, speaking of mockumentaries, I mean, probably the greatest and one of the first. This is Spinal Tap.
Yes, no, that's true. And I was gonna mention like Christopher Guest later on, like all his movies. I'm a big fan of those, and and they're not that funny. Like they're not laugh out loud funny, but you're giggling the entire movie. So it's just a very enjoyable experience for sure. Honestly, his Spinal Tap, I've seen it several times, and it's not as funny as I don't laugh at it as much as other people might have, and that could be like another angle to discuss, is that I do feel like that there's something about comedies where not everybody's gonna laugh at certain humor in the same way. Like for example, like Charlie Chaplin. I loved his movies growing up, and I still do. Like he cracks me up. I think he's timeless and genius. But then I stumbled on a documentary that was going through like the history of comedy, and they were saying how that Chaplin's comedy was very dated, and because it's slapstick, it doesn't really falls flat nowadays. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It's hilarious to me. So and I'm like, maybe I'm one of those that just relate to it, and then somebody else will watch it and be bored to death. So go figure.
Yeah, it is fundamentally all subjective, and it always will be. There's no way that you can convince somebody with just an entirely different sense of humor that your humor is right.
I mean, I think that's probably a real good way to think about it. I mean, like Matt, you were talking about how like you just don't find that much that will get you to go to the movies or something like that for a comedy, or I know Gil was saying it has to be like an actor or a director that really draws him there or whatever. I definitely get where you're both coming from with both of those, because I feel the same way that it'll be an actor or a director usually that draws me. But I think I probably go to the movies for comedy a lot. I mean, certainly not as much as other things, but still quite a bit. I was going to say earlier how I don't think I go to the movies that often for something that's we kind of touched on this earlier, that something that air quotes falls just under comedy. But if it's kind of like an action comedy or a sci-fi comedy, or certainly I go to see a lot of coming of age comedies or something like that. I mean, I watch a lot of that stuff. I was glancing at a couple of my movies on the wall here, just trying to see, some examples, but like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Galaxy Quest.
Oh yeah.
I two movies. Oh, the movie Evolution is a really, I think, something that people sleep on a lot. A lot of people don't like it, but that's one of those movies I would watch. Like I would pop in and just like watch if I was sick or something. I don't know why. It's one of those movies that just gets to me. I think it's really funny. Not that this is not a sci-fi movie, obviously, but another one like that is Office Space. I would put that in and watch that if I was like not feeling good. Maybe after I'd watched Star Wars or something, but still like those ones like for sure. But then like action comedy, like I think Kiss Kiss Bang Bang and The Nice Guys are like two of the best movies that have been made in the last 20 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
The movie Shoot 'Em Up is pretty funny. I don't know if it counts as a comedy or not. It's definitely a very action type movie, but it's hilariously funny.
Wait, which one? I missed that one.
Shoot 'Em Up. It's Clive Owen, like Paul Giamatti,
Monica Bellucci.
Yeah, is that more Bellucci. Like? I guess it's kind of like an action comedy, right? That's.
It's definitely an action comedy, but it's a parody of action movies.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say too. Like, there's the Kevin Smith comedies, definitely.
Yeah.
Dogma.
I wish his movies were still as good as they were. I'd love to see. I think he's making Clerks 3, and I have my doubts, but I would love for it to be as good as Clerks 2 was.
Yeah, no, it's Kevin Smith is another Jason Reitman type of thing where he's talented. He's a better writer than he is a director. And,
absolutely. Yeah. I don't think even he would disagree with that.
Yeah, no, exactly. And you kind of wonder if only he has taken his career in a different direction, he might have, instead of making a few mediocre movies, he might have just like written better scripts or even just so-so scripts that would have been elevated by someone else. But because he started off as a writer-director, he felt forced to keep on that train. And I think people should be more open to evolving with I think most people do, but it's, you have to see the signs, the signals, and people do. Like I said, Jason Reitman started producing a bunch of stuff. Kevin Smith started doing like a bunch of TV stuff and works with IMDb or something. Like they do different things, but it's not as if there's nothing for them to contribute to the movies. It's just that maybe they can contribute in a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah, comedy is hard. Like making movies is hard, and then comedy is doubly hard. That's why also Jim Carrey, like he just quit after like a while. He's like there's this, I guess, like Tarantino, who wants to quit after his 10th film, because there's this feeling if you just keep going, you cannot continue to be as funny as you were in the beginning. So you might as well just either stop or just do different things. So Jim Carrey just appears in all these like small roles in movies, because then he's not the guy. So you can't expect them to be as funny as Dumb and Dumber or anything else. The expectations are set lower. Yeah, it's kind of weird how that works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about any of the raunch romps.
Oh,
What are those?
yeah.
Which
like
ones?
like Porky's or American Pie, or I think Superbad might fit into that too.
Yeah, that's funny. That's an interesting genre. We had in Israel like a phase 2 of some movies that were made in that, and it makes sense because Israeli culture is kind of vulgar. So it is funny that it's like its own little genre. I was never a huge fan. I did find American Pie pretty funny, but all the 80s comedies and late 70s wasn't my thing. I like the Blues Brothers. I think that's a great comedy.
Yeah, that one's really good.
But it is more like a dramedy. It's a bit, it's a weird movie. The Blues Brothers is really weird. Like it's an amazingly shot movie and well made, and it's almost too good to be an SNL cast movie type of thing.
Yeah.
But
well, while you mention that, Wayne's World.
Yeah, Wayne's World. Like obviously, there's all the SNL comedies.
I mean, those are probably the two best movies that were based off of SNL sketches.
Yeah. Oh no, for sure. It's definitely two of my favorites. Like, I mean, and in general, like the Mike Myers comedies. Like until he, but definitely had like he was on a roll there for a while.
Oh yeah, I could watch Austin Power. I could watch Mike Myers like on that little stupid like that little truck thing, like backing up and going forward, backing up, going forward in that little hallway.
Yeah, no, there's some like amazing jokes in like Austin Powers. He was just completely inspired there, for sure. Like he was like on a Jim Carrey level there. Like there's nothing he could do that wasn't gonna be funny. Yeah,
I'll never forget that scene where like he's just killed all the fembots, and he's like in his little tiny like Union Jack Speedo, and he's promised Vanessa, the girl, that he's going to be monogamous, and she comes in and finds him with a bunch of like what appear to be passed out half naked women around him, and he's like trying to explain to her. I can't do the accent. I'm not going to even try the line, but
Yeah. I mean, he definitely had a streak there. I mean, man, I'm actually straining to think of many of those kinds of comedies that I've seen outside of what you've already said. I mean,
what kinds?
I remember, I mean, the American Pie type.
Oh, the raunch
comedy. Yeah, right. I mean,
the
Animal House
centered around people specifically trying to get laid as a plot device.
Yeah, I mean, I remember enjoying Animal House, but I also haven't seen it in like 20 years.
Pretty funny.
But I also might have just enjoyed it because I was like 16 and there are women and stuff. So, yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things where I don't know. I think those movies, the Austin Powers movies have rewatch value, at least like
especially the first one.
Yeah, the first one. At least for me, most of them don't. I mean, you know,
Most comedies, you mean?
well, most of this specific kind of comedy don't really have a lot of rewatch value. I mean, it's just like once you get past like the shock of the joke when you see it for the first time, if you see it a second time, it's just like it's. I mean, it's one of those things where a lot of jokes you can hear them like 2 or 3 times and still kind of chuckle at them. You know, it makes you crack up laughing the first time, and then 2 or 3 times later, it's just kind of like, yeah, that's good. And a lot of these movies, like I remember trying to rewatch Animal House, and I was really, I remember finding it quite funny, and then rewatching it and just being like, yeah, yeah, okay, yeah, yeah. I mean, it just doesn't have that kind of rewatch value, at least for me. But I know that I might be a minority on that, but.
Well, there's no question that comedies in general. I mean, I watched Spaceballs probably close to 58 times when I was a kid, and
Yeah,
obviously it was no longer funny after like the 20th or 30th, or as funny. But we were just like watching it with friends, and we had this whole thing of quoting the lines of the movie. We basically knew the whole movie by heart, so it's like a whole other
yeah.
level
It's a
for
different
sure.
kind of experience for you at that point.
But I will say this: there's no chance I would watch any drama movie 58 times. That would be very rare. So there is, even though comedies, the jokes are not as funny the second and third time. I've probably rewatched, except for maybe Star Wars movies. Comedies are probably the ones I've rewatched the most in my life, at least as a kid. Not now, but as a kid. Yeah, there's also the we didn't mention Eddie Murphy, like some of those
Yes.
comedies. Like
Yeah.
like I was obsessed with like the Golden Child. I don't know why that like early one. It was like a movie of his that I had like a VHS of, and I watched it like a bunch of times. It was just hilarious. It is weird. It seems like that even though black comedians are very prominent and there's so many of them, so many good ones. I mean, it's pretty much black people and Jews are like some of the best comedians of all time. That it's strange that there's definitely a gap there as far as like black actors that make it big in movies. So it is a tough genre. Like not everybody fits it. Like I feel like Richard Pryor never really like fit he did some movies and he was just not as nearly as funny as he was like in his stand up and so it doesn't always translate.
That's a good point. Yeah, you're right. Is that comparing how much you laugh at someone's stand up compared to their films? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, just to pile on what you just said, I never thought about this until you said it right now, but I think Chris Rock's Bigger and Blacker is like one of the funniest stand-up things I've ever seen in my entire life. Like, I mean, I probably watched it back when it came out like dozens of times. I'm trying to think of his movies, like other than when he makes like a small role in somebody else's movie, like he doesn't have that many movies where he's a lead or even one of the main characters that I would, say are like a great, awesome, classic comedy movie or something.
Yeah, it's weird. It's tough to pull that off, that transition. And I'm not even sure that many for Jews too. Like you try to think of like except for like Mel Brooks, and even he wasn't necessarily the best thing in his movies. He put himself in his movies, but often the other actors were better, or at least like just more well suited. Woody Allen, like we said, that's an issue too. Like I heard some of his stand up, like from early on, he's hilarious, like like a comedian, like a stand up comedian.
I believe it
But
when I see it.
yeah, I can share with you. I have like an album of his that I bought. Like it's really hilarious stuff. But yeah, but it doesn't. He's not an actor. Like he just plays himself in all his movies, which is kind of like the whole Chaplin thing. Only Chaplin was just a genius performer, so it kind of made sense. But yeah, no, it doesn't translate. Like I can't even think of a lot of Jewish comedians that turned actors. I mean, Jerry Seinfeld was the worst thing in Seinfeld. He still created the show, but like he was the least funny character, even though he was the comedian in the show.
Yeah.
I mean, Elaine was also not nearly as funny as Kramer and George, but basically saying, I guess Larry David, but again, he's playing himself. That's the whole Woody Allen thing. But it's maybe just an acting chops. Like some people, like Jim Carrey, and surprisingly Adam Sandler, I guess to some degree. Like some
Yeah.
of these people, like Will Ferrell, like they just have acting chops. And if you have that plus, you know how to make people laugh, that's pretty much all you need. And then you just need a good script and a decent director. You can make it happen.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's weird with, I mean, you just said, Will Ferrell. It's like, I think about his movies. And when I think of Will Ferrell earlier on, like, not necessarily when he was still with SNL, but I guess kind of around that time, he was still getting like smaller parts,
Mhm.
I think of Will Ferrell in Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, and he's like chasing them around the whole movie, acting like an idiot. And like, I think of him in like, the small bits he was in Austin Powers and Austin Powers 2. It's like some of the funniest shit I've ever like seen. It's just so hilariously funny. And then Anchorman happened, and I love Anchorman. It's a very funny movie, but I have like this grudge against the movie because right after Anchorman happened, we got like, I felt like 10 years or something of Will Ferrell just doing a variation of that character in each of his movies,
Yeah, basically just shouting at you.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's, yeah. I mean, I miss the stuff like Old School where, he's a big character, but not like the main character. And he's just really, really funny. And that's even a very similar kind of humor too. It's not even that different from the other ones, but I just mentioned, but it's still, I don't know. I feel like he was kind of reining it in just a little bit, and somehow that made it better for me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I
it's
fully
definitely-
acknowledge that Anchorman is as funny as it is because he's not reining it in. But still, like after that, it was like there was, I don't know, maybe there was just nowhere to go or something. I'm not really sure why I find a lot of the ones that followed not nearly as funny.
He just took a while to evolve, to try different things. He wrote it for a bit before.
Yeah.
No, and also there's the of course the Robin Williams comedies. There's a few of those that like he kind of went on a streak there. It does feel like some of these actors go on streaks. It's almost like how Matthew McConaughey just did a bunch of like rom-coms just in
Yeah.
a row. It's like I'm young and I'm buff, so I'm gonna do some rom-coms for a bit. It's like I feel like comedians, like when they're in their height, it's like I'm funny now, so I'm gonna make as many movies as I can and as much money as I can, and once that runs out, we'll figure it out. But like right now, we'll just do what we can.
And now Matthew McConaughey is doing almost all dramas.
Yeah, no, everybody has that phase. Like I feel like what's his face from 300, Gerard Butler also had a phase of doing action movies and some rom-coms. It's the same thing. He just hasn't like it doesn't seem like he's flipped back to seriousness. Maybe he's not interested in it, but like I feel like actors sometimes
Hasn't he
go
always
off.
kind of been an action movie star though?
I guess so. I thought he was like more of that he had some acting chops, and he was just maybe just
But he's really good.
riding on his like because everybody rides a little bit on the whole paycheck thing with Hollywood movies, and then maybe they'll go and do something serious. Like
He was
Liam
pretty good in
Neeson.
that Greenland movie.
Like Liam Neeson doesn't need to make action movies. He's making them for fun and for the paycheck, but yeah.
Yeah.
Don't talk about Liam Neeson's.
Why? Why?
Never mind.
Yeah, in any case.
Well,
Yeah.
you obviously haven't seen the sketch. It's okay.
No, I guess I didn't. Yeah, no, but it is interesting the whole history of comedies. But I guess as a summary, like, what do you feel like makes a for a standout comedy? We never like really locked down any of like Jason's like top comedies. Have you thought of any that like are? I guess you said
Well,
some.
I mean,
off
like
the
I was
scale.
mentioning, I think it's almost too broad of a category for me. you know, like I said earlier, if I was talking about, I mentioned a few that I would definitely say are like my favorite, or several of my favorite sci-fi comedies, and several of my favorite action comedies, you know, and stuff like that. And then, but yeah, I mean, it's weird to think of like narrowing it down to just a few. I can tell you the ones I mentioned, a few that had the most lasting power, just because over the years they've been movies I keep going back to. Like I said, Evolution and Office Space, but I don't consider those to be, as movies, to be nearly as good as some of the other stuff we mentioned. They're just movies that I find really funny and keep going back to. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, okay, you know how you mentioned specific moments you've had with movies, like, you know, you were talking about some of the stuff like with your friends all sitting around, and you're like, you've all seen it so many times, you're like quoting stuff, or I don't know, just I know, like for instance, Porky's is not a phenomenal movie at all by any stretch of the imagination, but I can tell you that like I have I've shown that movie to a room full of people who had never seen it before. And I don't know if I could think of a movie where I could get people laughing that hard. You know, like I've had moments where I've shown people one movie or another, and it's like, you know, when something hits, it hits. When you've got a whole room full of people reacting to something and it just never stops, it's crazy, you know? But yeah, I don't know. Like, as far as the best, it's hard to like narrow it down without putting, you know, sub genres onto it.
Yeah, no, I guess it is tough. I mean, I guess I mentioned mine in the beginning. There's something about, in a way, significance of a movie, whether it's like someone's career, like Dumb and Dumber, which I feel like is really what just set him as like, oh yeah, this is the next big thing. And then something like Team America or Doctor Strangelove, which is more just consequential satire. It just really is significant and worth like somebody should watch it just because it's almost like watching Hamlet. Like it makes you like reaffirms your like understanding of humanity in some sort of like new way.
Yeah.
And I don't know what's the third one. I mean, because like, you know, Dumb and Dumber is the laughs and the actor, and the other one is significance. I feel like there's another category there. I don't know if it's the Young Frankenstein, maybe. You know, like just comedies that really are, and Doctor Strangelove is an example of it, like using the craft of filmmaking to tell a story, and it just happens to be a comedy. That's the ones that I really appreciate. I don't know if we mentioned too many examples of that, but some comedies do better than others when it comes to
Well, I think what a good example, when you say that part, that aspect where the actual filmmaking itself becomes a part of what's so funny and a part of the telling the story and everything, that's where a lot of parody comes in, right? Because I mean, at that point, you've got to model everything about your movie to elicit that feeling of what you're parodying, you know? So like when you've got like, you know, you said Young Frankenstein, but also, I don't know, Matt and I have I've talked a lot about like the movie Spy. You know, it's got a lot of like references to, you know, the Bond movies in it and stuff like that. It's like really funny, but you know, also of course, like you know, Shoot 'em Up, you know, is the one that everything about it, like there's so many references to like the greatest like, you know, action gunfight type movies that you've ever seen, and they're direct nods to that stuff. Obviously, Hot Fuzz would be like a perfect example where like he's using so many things, not just direct references, but just the way that I mean, there's so many moments in that movie that are just like nods to Michael Bay, you know, and his films.
Yeah, I think that was the third one. I feel like the Edgar Wright type of comedies that just really take it to a high level as far as the filmmaking craft and attention to those details. Yeah, for sure. That's definitely, yeah. And then like we said, like there's the rom-coms and stuff, which I feel like is almost not comedies. Or the action comedies or the Martian and whatever else you want to categorize. Like that's a very different type of comedy to me. Like I wouldn't like, for example, The Princess Bride. Is it a comedy? Is it a fantasy? Is it a rom-com? It's
Is it a perfect movie?
It's a perfect movie, exactly. But it's I don't feel like, even though it is jokey and everything, it's not really a comedy per se. Like I don't. It's tough for me to categorize it as a full.
That one's really hard because it's like I don't feel like you can make a case to say that it's more of a comedy than it is three other genres. And I don't think you can make a case to say that it's one of those other genres more than it is a comedy.
Yeah.
I would throw, not nearly as much, not nearly as perfectly balanced as The Princess Bride, but I would also throw like Romancing the Stone into that as well, because that is a hilariously funny movie. It's fun, it's action packed, it's romantic, it's it's got the whole even balance.
Yeah, but that's exactly, like a rom-com / action drama, action comedy, more so than a straight up comedy.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I would say just throwing this out there, like two movies that were to me very recent, I think in the last 2 years, that stood out enough that I just recently purchased them on Blu-ray, that are definitely comedies, are Date Night and Tag. I really liked both of those movies a lot.
I heard good things about Tag. Yeah, they got like good reviews.
That's the better of the two.
Yeah, I haven't seen that yet, but I'll watch anything with I'll watch anything with Jeremy Renner at this point. So excellent. Yeah, the funny thing is, I'm thinking about it, and I don't think any of my favorite comedies are comedies that can't be that can just be defined as like, this is just a comedy, as opposed to like a dramedy or a sci-fi comedy, or I mean, Blazing Saddles. I mean, yeah, it's a pure comedy, but it's still a Western, and so maybe
and kind of a parody, sort of, right?
Yeah. But I mean, the funny thing, if you're going to ask me like the dumb movie that just always made me bust a gut laughing, was like growing up, it's Tommy Boy. No matter how many times I see that scene where the deer wakes up in the back of the car, it still kills me. But
I died too soon.
Yeah.
Not the deer. Chris
Deer did not die. He woke up.
But yeah, I mean, like there are movies out there that I can say are like just really dumb entertainment that I'm just sitting there. Like there's this really dumb movie, Rat Race, with like John Lovitz and
the modern remake of Mad World.
Right, and I mean, it's a dumb movie and it's not well produced, but they've got this Jewish family driving around in Hitler's car, and it's that's all fun stuff. I'm never going to like name those as something that like I'm like craving to rewatch. I mean, again, it's like you were saying, it's something that I might toss on the TV if I'm like sick and just want to cheer myself up and don't want to think or something. But and there's value to that. But yeah, I mean,
I don't know how you do it, but if you could somehow make a whole movie about the rich people in that film, like betting on the crazy shit that they're betting on throughout every time we cut back to them.
Yeah.
That was like some of the best stuff in that movie.
Yeah. But yeah, aside from that, I mean, most of my favorite comedies, I guess I would just say the through line is it's just a good story that's well photographed, well put together cinematically, and it happens to be funny.
So not categorizing it too much.
When you look at the history, the really far back history of comedy, I mean, it was basically drama wasn't really, it wasn't comedy versus drama, it was tragedy versus comedy. So like basically if anybody came out alive, it was a comedy.
Yeah, but
I mean,
in a way, wouldn't you say that our system of genre that we talk about nowadays in all these not just movies but in all of this stuff, don't you think in a way that that's kind of progress?
Yes, I do believe that that's progress, and again, I've definitely narrowed my my view of comedy. I don't think that I mean, The Merchant of Venice is still considered to be one of Shakespeare's comedies, and
Never saw it.
If you prick us, do we not bleed?
That's not very much a comedy. Let's just say that. At least from what I've seen, I saw the Al Pacino.
If you prick us,
I know the line. I just never read the play or saw any version of it.
It's also very anti-Jew, but but anyway, but
it's not completely. It is anti-Jew, but it definitely goes into the nuance in a way of like just it's Shakespeare's. It's a bit nuanced, but no, comedy is a very broad subject. I was thinking like we mentioned you mentioned what's a Rat Race, and like that was like Jerry Zucker. And that like leads into the whole Airplane and Naked Gun movies, and I was also a big fan, like not from
Mafia,
not from them, but
Mafia,
also like the Police Academy movies when I was a kid. I really loved those. There's so many comedies out there, so it is funny how we were exposed to so much when we were young compared to like now, where I feel like this stuff is more trickled. But I'm sure that this generation has its own like comedy heroes that maybe we're not as aware of, at least at the movies. But yeah, I guess I wonder, Jason, if it's like just a factor that if you go to the movies more often, then definitely I do, then and maybe more than Matt, that like because you watch so many movies for variety, you'll switch off and maybe watch a comedy instead of an action movie.
Honestly, I think that this generation and possibly the next 20 years is going to go down in history as the black hole of cinematic comedy.
There's an issue there with the whole wokeness and stuff that like maybe you can't do all the comedy all types of comedy.
Well, that's the thing. Like political correctness is funny. Like making fun of political correctness is funny. Being politically correct is not funny.
Yeah.
No, you cannot. I mean, unless you're telling knock-knock jokes, you're not going to make people laugh unless you are attacking somebody or some group or something like that. You are making
plenty of knock-knock jokes that are really racist.
Yeah, I can't think of any off the top of my head, but
but it's kind of like I think what's his face, John Cleese mentioned about like even Monty Python, that they're given a lot of hard time about like Life of Brian and certain jokes that they made, and it's you're always gonna offend somebody. It's just that nowadays there's more people to offend. Like in the past, there was religious people. Now it's like secular people as well, so it's like you can't win, like you're kind of like getting it from all sides for sure. It's just there's more people that can get offended by stuff, and
and it's also one of those things where like with the internet, with Twitter, with the fact that so much of our information is online, even if you have a fairly big budget movie, and somebody's offended by your movie, what are they going to do? Write a letter to the editor, picket outside, a theater somewhere and say, don't see this movie because they said this awful thing or whatnot. I mean, that's all you could do. Now you get accused. I mean, people dig up something that you said 10 years ago and, they find out who you are, where you live, where you work, call up your boss, and you're fired in a week. Comedy's always been dangerous. I mean, it's always been dangerous. Lenny Bruce, if God would grace us with bringing him back to life for a day, would definitely tell you that comedy has always been dangerous, but it's getting really broadly dangerous for just about everybody. And Hollywood is responding to this by making the all female cast Ghostbusters movie, or making if that's their idea of comedy, yeah, that's going to end up in the dustbin of history very quickly. So yeah, I think eventually people are, and maybe eventually that'll be a good thing, is that people will be starved for actually being able to genuinely laugh at something, and so they will look to the past, to the 90s, to the 80s, to the 60s and 70s, and so on and so forth, where some people were actually allowed to enjoy life. So
on that note, I guess it's a good way to end it. I guess we went a bit long. I guess it's a very broad subject, so there was a lot to cover. Well, one last thing I would say is, like, as a nod to Kubrick about, like, Doctor Strangelove, even though it's not a super funny movie, it does succeed as a comedy in many ways, and it is amusing and funny at times. It does seem like there's a big movement now with comedy directors turning drama in a way, like Adam McKay and the guy, I think the guy who did the Joker.
Todd Phillips.
Like, it's very tough. There's very few directors, including like Spielberg as an example, and more recently Paul Thomas Anderson, that attempt to do a comedy movie and just fall flat. It's very difficult for a drama like director to switch to making a comedy, but it's easier in the reverse in a way. So that's, like, that's just amazing, just like Kubrick's, as far as like his legacy, the fact that he was able to just pull off like a crazy off the wall comedy just out of nowhere and succeed almost on every level. It's just like how genius he was. But I guess all his movies were, he was kind of like the Coens in a way. Like, all his movies had this dark humor to them, so he just turned it up a notch for that movie. But it's something that so many directors fail, is to do a comedy. Like, after the, I'm trying to think. I don't think there's really any like notable directors that just go off and make a comedy and it's super successful.
Yeah, and I mean it's the same thing with actors. I mean, you get a ton of Jim Carreys and Adam Sandlers and Will Ferrell's, and people who are able to at least, I mean, Will Ferrell to a lesser extent, but I mean, he's even managed to have some success, at least dabbling in drama and everything. But it's hard to. But I mean, like, whenever Al Pacino's tried to do something like, well, I'm just not aware of anything that Al Pacino has done in a comedic role that's actually funny.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Cool. I'll stop this recording before we keep going forever.